Hello, Steeler Nation, and welcome to your Steeler Nation vidcast, part of the Big Play Vidcast Network and sponsored by Total Sports Enterprises. I'm your host, G.Stryker, and how crazy is it that I may have just interviewed the Steelers' next GM? Let's talk about Louis Riddick. I got to interview the guy back at the end of July, and I got to ask him a ton of questions that were not only Steeler related, but I was coming to it from an announcer's perspective since he currently still is an ABC and ESPN broadcaster for Monday Night Football. Essentially, a couple quick questions about the Steelers themselves. So I asked him, one of the questions that I asked about to get some insight was, how would he have approached the Steelers draft? And of course, it was after the Steelers drafted. And Steeler Nation, while I'm talking, please put up your comments, put up your questions. I'm going to be getting to them tonight. If you have any questions on Louis Riddick, you have questions on the team, questions about the NFL in general, the Super Bowl, go ahead and throw them up. I'll get to them in time. But the first thing I asked him was about the draft. And I said, who would you have taken in the draft? And of course, you know, he's not the GM yet, but he gave some interesting insight. He loves Najee Harris as an athlete, but he stated he would not have taken Najee Harris with his number one pick. And he was visibly upset about the Steelers taking Pat Freiermuth with the number 2 pick. He did not like the Pat Freiermuth pick at all. He definitely said he wanted to invest those higher picks in offensive lineman positions. Now, fortunately, Pat Freiermuth ended up becoming a very good piece and finally a wide receiver one that we have not had in Pittsburgh since Heath Miller. And even though our running game wasn't 100%, the guy we drafted in the first round made the Pro Bowl. So we got some interesting draft picks, an interesting perspective in the way he wanted to do it. But he obviously wanted to target the offensive and defensive lines in the draft as being the number one priority. So if we picked him up as a general manager, that would be something that would probably be on a higher priority moving forward. Another thing that we talked about was what were the biggest needs for the Steelers? And keep in mind, this is the offseason before the season started. Number one, offensive line. No question. We had to improve the offensive line. The offensive running game was horrible the year before, and we needed some competency to set up play action so they don't have to go to a quick pass attack like they did at the end of 2019. Offensive also has great playmakers, but do they have enough beef on the offensive line? So that was what he wanted to do, was attack that offensive line. He liked the free agent moves that the Steelers made for the most part. He stated that Ben can't get hit a lot or sacked a ton this year because it would affect his throwing, which did end up happening. Ben got sacked a ton this season, unfortunately, which probably led to him retiring a lot earlier than he may have. If he would have gotten sacked around the amount of times, like 9 sacks in 2019, he might have stuck around another season. But no, getting up there in sacks again was definitely a big reason why he couldn't come back and kept having nagging injuries the entire year. But he wanted to make sure that Ben could not get hit. On D, he loved the Melvin Ingram pickup. And he also stated that Highsmith will be a breakout player for that year, stating that we both thought that Highsmith was the better player than Melvin Ingram, and that is what turned out to be the case for the Steelers. Of course, loves Minka Fitzpatrick. Who doesn't? On special teams, he said the Steelers needed to flip the field in punting and get a great kicker. Kind of a pluses and minuses with Presley Harvin III, bringing in him to be a field flipper. Unfortunately, when he's not flipping fields, he's shanking some punts here and there. But overall, I thought he was the player of the game offensively in the playoff game. Had a great punting game in that playoff game, flipping the field for the Steelers in a game where they really weren't that competitive. I'm going to go check out your questions here. Let's get your comments and your questions. What up, Kenny Beamer? Welcome to the show, Kenny. You're always firing off and know how to do it right. So Steeler Nation on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook. Throw down your questions. Throw up your comments. This is your show. The Steeler Nation vidcast is where you have the voice. We get to talk about what you want to talk about. But right now, I'm still starting off talking about Louis Riddick because I'm geeking out that I actually got to interview the guy. And I shot him a message today. I'm waiting to hear back from him to see how the interview process is going. But I did wish him luck. I said, good luck in your interview. and Pittsburgh would be very fortunate to have you on the team. A couple people too, just in Steeler Nation, I know you may only know Louis Riddick as an announcer, may not like the way he has called previous games against the Steelers. I understand that as a fact. But you have to realize he has an extensive career in the scouting department in the NFL. He served as both a scout and director of pro personnel for the Washington football squad when it was called their previous name in '07, and then again for the Philadelphia Eagles when he left Washington. So he has experience in the league, directing teams, understands player movement, player evaluation, and he's an incredibly intelligent football mind. Just getting to speak with him for those 40 short minutes. Go over to SteelerNation.com if you want to re-listen to that interview. It's popping up. A lot of people are listening to that today. And it was really very insightful. I mean, we're kind of following the bullet points tonight. But if you have any other questions on Riddick as well, other ideas for possible GM hires, please let me know. And no, ESPN will not be getting 2 third-round draft picks for that if we end up taking Louis Riddick on as our guy, because they announced the draft. They don't have a team. So talk to him as well about losing Mike Hilton and Steven Nelson, and how does the secondary hold up in that situation? He was very concerned about the secondary. He being a safety in the NFL when he played in the NFL, starting off as well from that side of the ball. He wanted to know how the Steelers would handle man coverage in third mediums. We had a lot of trouble in third and longs, even stopping people in man coverage. Great team defense can make up for the weaknesses on D. And fortunately, our pass rush did help the secondary out a lot. So that's one aspect that was kind of something we had to put together and work on this season as a moving structure, because we weren't sure how Hilton was going to, or how Sutton was going to be moving into that other cornerback spot, but he locked it down pretty well. Took a little bit for Witherspoon to get his legs under him, but once he did, he became a really good asset on that defense, allowed Sutton to bump back down into some nickel. Of course, Hayden again was Hayden. Hopefully we can pick Hayden back up this year. I'd love to get him on a 1-year deal, possible 2-year deal, 1-year option, or 1-year option to get rid of him if we had to, if he starts declining. But I keep Hayden until the wheels fall off that guy. He's just so smart. So smart. Asked him about how tough this division was, because previously in 2019, obviously, the Steelers, Browns, and Ravens all made the playoffs, and I was still discussing how concerned I was about Joe Burrow as well for the up-and-coming Bengals, who are now playing in the Super Bowl, but asked, is this a league or the division that Steelers could compete in or win? But of course, he agreed the Steelers could win the division. We understood that Cleveland was for real on paper. They have great talent, that the Baltimore team is going to be Baltimore. They're going to be solid every year. But this year, Cincinnati took the division and the Steelers made the playoffs. So Steelers ended up number 2 in the division. And he did predict that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase were going to go off this season. And picking Chase as a rookie to do that, understanding going up against wide receivers as a defensive back, he's honed in on that aspect. So really, really love that kind of stuff. Love the pickup. Always, Kenny. Rob, how you doing, my friend? Steelers have never had a GM. Noel did the duties. Dan Rooney Jr. was helping the 70s, and Donahoe took on some GM duties toward the end of Emperor Noel's range. But Kevin Colbert was first and only. Kevin Colbert, you're right. Kevin Colbert was the first person they ever called a GM, because before that point, they were always the director of pro personnel. Essentially just always, and I hear that the reason that they actually made him GM and stopped calling him the director of pro personnel was because he was not allowed to sit in the coach's box for senior practices for Senior Bowl. So they had to change his title to get him into the box for practices, because you had to be a coach or a GM, not just a front office person. So that was one of the reasons why they changed his name. And he was so integral in that process of finding talent, interviewing talent, going to pro days, going to the Senior Bowl and evaluating talent there. That's very important for a GM in the Steelers system. I would disagree a little bit. Chuck Noll did have the most say on who became on the team, who played on the team. But Dan Rooney had a big say on the talent that they brought in, how they evaluated talent, and was a big reason why they didn't draft Marino in '84. Otherwise, that would have been Noll's guy. They didn't take him. So that's that aspect too. Brandon Wallace, great to hear from you, my friend. If quarterback Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Matt Carroll, Desmond Ridder, and Sam Howell are all off the board by pick 20, what position are you taking first round? To tell you the truth, I don't take any of those quarterbacks in the first round other than Pickett, maybe Willis. I'm still not sold on Willis. I think maybe you trade back and get Willis because I think Carroll's going to go ahead of Willis in this draft. But I am big on strong safety. I'm still harping that. If there's a strong safety stud and we don't get Tyrann Mathieu in free agency, that's what I want to pick up in the draft because that's how the Steelers defense motors. Get an athletic, banging, strong safety to pair next to Minkah Fitzpatrick. Look out, opposing teams. That's how we're going to start slowing down Cincinnati in that passing attack. And also use that guy in those rushing attacks and those balanced attacks in Cleveland and Baltimore. That's the type of player we need. And inside linebackers. I could see inside linebacker going in that spot. I could see an interior lineman going in that spot. If a good tackle didn't drop, I mean, it's wide open. Wide open, Brandon. I'm sorry to not lock it down exactly to one position, but BPA of those positions, to tell you the truth. And that's usually the way the Steelers weight their boards to try to go toward that kind of stuff. Casually assume Steelers GM pick will be a smooth transition with no drop-off is delusional. Sure, Colbert would advise from afar for a couple of years, but the new GM most likely would be a downgrade. And that's an interesting perspective. I guess you could take that perspective as well when you were, say, if we were going from Donahoe to Colbert, but you've got to take in mind we actually improved under Colbert with drafting and personnel acquisitions when we picked up Colbert. That was actually a step up. He's one of the best to ever do it. So there's no reason to believe I can agree with you by saying there will be a step down from Colbert. Nobody's going to be like Colbert. That guy was just incredible. And another interesting thing to consider, the Steelers only had 3 coaches. We all know this since 1969, but they only had 5 director of pro personnel / GMs, 5 of them. And one of them was promoted to president, Dan Rooney. So 4 of them did not get internally promoted, but were part of this team and were the director of pro personnel for the most part during their tenure. Steelers go through GMs just as about as regular as they go through coaches, which ain't often. So just keep that in mind. Aaron Harris, you think Canada's offense will be on full display this coming year? Yes, I do. Yes, I do, Aaron. And I said this on a couple posts, and thank you, Facebook, too, for joining in there, Aaron. This past football season, this offense looked exactly like Fichtner's offense last year, and the only common denominator was Ben Roethlisberger not being able to throw down the field. Short pass attack. And it became the Ben Roethlisberger offense. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers offense is going to be closer to what we saw in the preseason last year, where Rudolph and Haskins moved the ball up and down the field easily in that offense. A lot more play action in that offense, a lot more reads for the quarterbacks. And we were running some plays out of the Canada playbook with some play action and some pre-snap motion. Didn't do a ton of pre-snap motion in the preseason, started getting into the regular season. But yes, more pre-snap motion, more run pass option. And that is how Canada kind of develops it. And then it comes down to if we're going to have more of a mobile quarterback or not a mobile quarterback, depending on who we pick up here in free agency and or the draft. So those will be some interesting shoes to fill and how the offense will develop under Matt Canada, which I'm giving him a pass on last year. And that's the only year I'm going to give him a pass for. Really is. Rad Rob, Striker. I did not mean to say Dan Rooney, but instead Art Rooney too. Dan's brother was the 70s advisor. Yeah, okay. I can agree with that. I can agree with that. That makes perfect sense. Well said, Rad Rob. Well said. Keep bringing in your comments and questions, guys. Another thing that we talked about when I was interviewed Louis Riddick, I asked him, is Ben a top 10 quarterback? he was worried about Ben getting hit and banged up to the point where his arm was no longer effective. Happened last season, or 2019, after the 11-game win streak, when he started getting banged up. Then he became a one-dimensional quarterback. Same thing happened to him this year, except he got banged up a little earlier in the season. Still found a way to win more than he lost. Still found a way to get us into the playoffs. So I give Ben all the kudos in the world for that. And we both agreed that, even though he wasn't a top 10 quarterback, he can still win you games because he's a Hall of Fame quarterback and he's a clutch quarterback. He knows how to win and manage football games to the point to come back and win in the fourth quarter, which he did this season 5 times. So great job, Ben. And he was the biggest reason why we made the playoffs and had some great fourth quarter comebacks this year as well. We talked extensively about Dwayne Haskins. He was in Washington when they picked up Dwayne Haskins, and I believe, let me check to see if he was actually the director of pro personnel when they picked up Dwayne Haskins. 2007. Nope, he was with Philly at that time. But he was very excited about Dwayne Haskins. He knows him well. He texts with him. Dwayne Haskins is his guy. So, furthermore, we went to talk about Rudolph as well. He sees Rudolph strictly as a backup quarterback, and there's nothing wrong with being a backup quarterback in the NFL. A backup quarterback is needed in the NFL. But he really likes Dwayne Haskins' upside. He said he went to a terrible situation structurally and philosophically in Washington. His head coach, Jay Gruden, didn't even want him. So Snyder made sure that he was drafted. Jay Gruden hated him. Jay Gruden got fired midway through that season. That's what Washington does. Fire people midway through the season. Not something Pittsburgh ever does. It still did not excuse his off-field decisions that he made in Washington. He was very harsh and critical of Dwayne Haskins as a man, and he needs to take ownership of the bad decisions that he made while he was a human being in Washington. He has not made those bad decisions in Pittsburgh. He looks like he's learning under the system. So he said Ben Roethlisberger and Alex Smith both agreed and said individually that, and Riddick agrees as well, that Haskins is as talented throwing the football as anyone they have ever seen. First round draft pick, 15th player taken in the draft arm. That's how good this guy. He can make any throw on the field. He said Pitt was the best situation for him. He doesn't have to be the guy. Just learn and get better. The talent is there. And it said he can work out in 2 ways. One, he's the steal of a lifetime. And you got him for nothing. Number 2, he'll disappear. And you won't have to worry about it. The train will keep moving on. But you didn't lose anything for trying him out anyway. So he's still on the roster. He's still going to be in the mix. And Kevin Colbert was really excited at the time when they picked him up as well. For him, especially being a top 15 pick and all that. So that was interesting to me. So if to take these opinions and put them on a line, if Louis Riddick becomes the GM, you've got to think that he is going to be pro Dwayne Haskins to possibly becoming the next quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I'm projecting a line. We have not gone through free agency. We have not gone through the draft. But if it's a question between Rudolph and Haskins, I will know the way that GM Riddick would be leaning toward if he had a decision to make. And he knows a lot of people. I mean, he went to school at Pitt. He played safety at Pitt for 4 years. He's good friends with Mike Tomlin, really good friends with Danny Smith, the special teams coordinator. They both served in Washington at the same time and were both with the Washington system at the same time, became good friends there. He's also cousins with the former defensive coordinator, Tim Lewis, in Pittsburgh, though Tim Lewis was underneath of Cowher, was not underneath of Mike Tomlin, but still part of the organization. The Rooneys know Lewis, and these all come into effect of him and his family, how he is as a family man and a person, because that's important to the Rooneys, how you are as a family man, your character, not just what you can do. And that's important. And that's why people with high characters stay on the Steelers for a long time. People with lower character get recycled quickly and usually quietly. We usually don't hear about the problems that these guys have. I mean, Coach Haley, a lot of other teams will talk about Coach Haley. Steelers never said a word about him. Other than he grew up under his dad and he used to be a ball boy for the Steelers and a good kid and the best offensive coordinator statistically that the Steelers have ever had, but decided to go in a different direction and get rid of Haley. So grass ain't always greener, Steeler Nation. Grass ain't always greener. Here is another one that Brandon Wallace, you got to listen up for this one too, because this is something that Louis Riddick and I talked about. We wanted to talk about Terrell Edmunds and his progression. Louis said he needs to become an all-around safety like Minkah. His deep field play needed to improve and be on par with Minkah. Obviously, it didn't, because he wanted them to be able to switch off going deep and who would come up in the run game. He said he still had room to improve his game, which I agreed with as well. I just didn't see as much improvement as we would have liked to have seen in Terrell Edmunds. Moving forward, if he's on the team, I would think that maybe he would not be as apt to keeping Terrell Edmunds as maybe Kevin Colbert may have been. I could be wrong. I may be projecting, but he may agree with me and not Brandon Wallace over there. So thanks, Brandon, for jumping on and giving us some of your insight as well. Team Edmonds! It's on cue, Brandon. Love it, man. Love it. Love it. Good question here from Aaron Harris. Do you think Anthony McFarland will be used more or speed in the backfield? I hope so. Aaron, I really hope so. That's what I was hoping for and excited for these players like Jalen Samuels out of the backfield and Anthony McFarland being these nice two-way threats. Najee Harris obviously being a much better pass receiver than I ever anticipated coming out of college. I mean, he was used as a pass catcher, but I didn't think he'd be this good and already projecting at a higher floor than Bell was when he first entered the team as a pass catcher, because Bell became an insane pass catcher for us. And he's already showing the athleticism of being able to catch very low thrown balls, poor pass balls, one-handing balls. The guy is fun to watch. So would I love to see Anthony McFarland as the Batman or the Robin to Najee Harris's Batman? I would love to see that, Aaron Harris. I'm concerned now, though, if you followed Anthony McFarland's social media, he put up a picture of him with his head down in his Steeler uniform with a hashtag set me free. We've seen this stuff before, happened with Steven Nelson before we got rid of Steven Nelson. Is this going to be another situation where he's unhappy with the way he was treated? He got hurt early in the preseason, didn't come back, went on injured reserve for a bit. When he came back to the team, he never retook that number 2 spot and was never given the snaps in that number 2 spot again for the rest of the season. Obviously disappointed with his use on this team. And I love the way he worked in that Matt Canada offense in the University of Maryland. That's exactly why I thought Anthony McFarland is the perfect running back to serve Matt Canada's offense, because he already played under him in college. So yes, I agree with him in a lot of different points there. As you see, Aaron Harris, thank you so much for the comments. Guys, keep bringing your comments and questions because this stuff is just super fun for me to talk about. I asked Louis Riddick as well about, as a GM of the Steelers, what would have been your offseason approach to this team? His biggest concerns, which he even touched on a little bit when we were talking about the draft, but improve the physicality across the offensive line. That was number one, making sure you're bringing in people that are going to impose their will and push the guy in front of them on offensive line. They also see, they have to improve physically across the offensive line, start at the line, and see if Mike Tomlin can coach them up and reset the line of scrimmage, providing running lanes. We still didn't get a whole lot of running lanes. We were still down at the bottom of the barrel for rushing attack last year, but the athleticism of our rookie running back was enough to be the 4th best running back in the league and make the Pro Bowl, and deservedly so make the Pro Bowl. I'm glad that Cincinnati made the playoffs for the sole reason that Deontay Johnson and Najee Harris could make the Pro Bowl, because both of them were deserving. Najee's stats were better than half of the receivers that made the Pro Bowl initially. So I'm glad he ended up making it in as the alternate, caught a 2-point conversion, did pretty well. Najee converting a 3rd and short there in this Pro Bowl. Of course, all-world Defensive Player of the Year to be announced on Thursday, TJ Watt with a sack fumble on cut Kirk Cousins, which ended up turning into a fly ball, which they called a pick six. It can't be a pick six if it's a fumble. It's actually a fumble return. NFL announcers get it right. He didn't return an interception. It's not a pick six. It's a fumble return with the other guy from Cleveland. Got to turn that guy in, who they thought was going to be Defensive Player of the Year this year before TJ Watt just showed the league that he's a Watt, and the league needs to remember that Watts are Defensive Player of the Year. He predicted that Deontay Johnson would have a breakout season on offense. Obviously, he made the Pro Bowl. He also said Claypool has the physical tools to be the next great wide receiver in the league, like a Mike Evans, like a, dare to say, Megatron, not that type of Megatron yet, but the size, speed, athleticism. I mean, he checks all the boxes. I don't know why he regressed as much as he did this season, because they needed to lean on Claypool a bit more than they did. I think that might be a little bit more on Ben not being able to deliver the ball to him. You may disagree with me. Tell me what you think in Steeler Nation, because I'd love to hear your ideas as well, which we're taking off the top. Couple more questions here popping in as well. Oh, gosh, I missed a couple here. I'm sorry, guys. I was getting excited. Ryan Green, how you doing, Ryan? What do you think about Marcus Mariota, and if he fits the mold of a quarterback the Steelers should pursue in free agency? I am not personally on the Marcus Mariota bus yet. He definitely has athleticism, but I think the Steelers already have a player on the roster that was a highly drafted player that has been bouncing around the league a little bit, or that maybe wasn't given the chance, and then maybe in another system would be a better quarterback. We already have that quarterback on our roster. His name is Dwayne Haskins. In free agency, I want to pick up a guy that's a known commodity and has been playing and starting at a high level. And we have two options right now, two bridge options. One of them I stated as Bridgewater, being a bridge option quarterback. Very good touchdown to interception ratio, makes smart decisions. But he was not be a guy for long term. A guy that may end up being a long-term option would be a guy like Jameis Winston. I really do like Jameis Winston's ability to throw. He had like 14 touchdowns, 3 interception, added another touchdown rushing. New Orleans was in the talk for being a Super Bowl contender up through week 8 when he got injured. As soon as he got injured, they became nothing. You never heard another thing about the New Orleans Saints the rest of the year. Tampa Bay rebounded and won the division. So that's what happened in that respect. So, everybody has their own opinion on Marcus Mariota. I'm open to it if they decide doing it, but he's not my first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh option. I think we already have that person already on our roster, and I think Dwayne Haskins is already better than Marcus Mariota. You got to start bringing in people that I think that might be better than Dwayne Haskins, in my opinion. Oh, and one quick thing that I need to talk about too is that Kyler Murray now may be an option as a free agent, or if they cut him, might be a free agent. They try to trade him. He's right up there now in the same conversation with Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson for being on the trade block. Great starting quarterbacks. Those guys are obviously your rare breed number one chances if you want to bring some guys in there to try to provide win now football for your team. I take any of those guys. And even the guy down there in Houston as well that took the year off. His name slips my mind for 1 second, but you guys will help me out with that. You guys are great at that. Oh, sorry. Jermaine LeBlanc, in your opinion, who's going to be the Steelers' next starting quarterback, which is we've been talking about all night tonight. So thank you very much for joining the conversation, Jermaine. Any more questions, throw it up there. We love your stuff. But yeah, if it came down to the people currently on the roster with Haskins and Rudolph, I'd be with Riddick, and we'd be leaning toward Haskins if I had to make a decision. Is Mike Munchak still an option for offensive line coach? Yes. Yes, he is, Michael Scott Joyner, and I hope he becomes that option. All of Steeler Nation is hoping he becomes that option. Steeler Nation did hire a new wide receivers coach today, which was very interesting to me. Picked up a guy by the name of Frisman Jackson. He's the wide receiver coach. Ike Hilliard is now out. I don't know why Hines Ward wasn't interviewed. I don't know if he doesn't get along with Tomlin or somebody else in the staff, but I always thought he'd be an awesome hire and be an incredible wide receivers coach. But Frisman Jackson is being brought in. He's been a wide receiver coach since 2007 for many different teams in college and pro. Oddly enough, this is something that I find odd. He's never been within an organization longer than 2 years in his entire tenure. I find that a little suspect in my interview process and my research process, but we'll have to see how he does with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, the wide receivers regressed a little bit last year. Some had to do with Juju getting hurt, but Claypool took a big step back. DJ did make the Pro Bowl. That's a big plus. It's a feather in the cap for the wide receivers. But they just were not as effective as they were in years previous. Let me pull that one off. Brian Brown. How you doing, Brian? Great to hear from you again. Sup, Striker? Louis Riddick, huh? He is a good choice. Seems pretty smart on ESPN. Yep. And he, like we said before in the show, also a huge front office guy in the league already, serving as both a scout and director of player personnel for both the Washington football program and the Philadelphia Eagles. So this guy isn't some schlub just coming from announcing into the league like some other people, or just being a broadcaster like the Raiders did, where they hire a broadcaster to become their GM. This is not the same situation. This is a guy that knows how to scout talent, knows how to find talent, and turn that talent into good football players. So obviously a different situation here, Steeler Nation. Justin McGonigal, hello, love the show. Thank you so much, Justin. We love you too. We love all that you do for Steeler Nation, my friend. Rad Rob, hashtag Team Onion equals get Bills linebacker Edmonds, because he's the only Edmonds worth getting. See, that's where I'd be with you on the whole Edmonds nepotism trip for Colbert. If we found a way to go out and get rid of draft picks to pull in the Edmonds from Buffalo, then yes, I would be all for that nepotism argument that you always like throwing up, which I enjoy reading. Thanks, Rad Rob. Always love that. Justin, how do I feel about the Steelers drafting Kenny Pickett, which I discussed a little earlier? If Kenny Pickett was available at 20, I'm probably drafting him. I really am. I don't see myself moving up for him. If I was the GM, you'd have to ask Riddick if he gets hired. But for me personally, I would draft Kenny Pickett standing pat at 20. I think he has great value there at 20. And see what he's worth and made of, because being able to play in the same stadium, not passing on a first-round Pitt quarterback, dropping in the draft like we did with Marino, it might be the reason to take Pickett. Who knows? Will he develop into the same? We can only hope. We can only hope. And Justin also asked, Ryan Green, is there a story on Steeler Nation today about Mariota? There might be. Yes, there is. Go to SteelerNation.com, guys. Especially you, Ryan Green, and see what Steeler Nation, not me from Steeler Nation, not the podcaster from Steeler Nation, but the writer that actually put out that idea for a well-thought-out argument on Marcus Mariota. He will probably agree more with taking Mariota than I would personally, but that's why we have such a great nation, lots of great different interesting perspectives, and that's why we get to talk about them here on your Steeler Nation vidcast. Brian Brown, Marcus Mariota throws too many interceptions, and that's the way. For me, it's all about accuracy, winning football games, and touchdown to interception ratio, which has to be low. So that's why I'm a little bit more toward you, Brian. Rad Rob, Marcus Mariota can literally run circles around Dwayne Haskins. I'll disagree, but we can disagree. Jameis Winston throws more interceptions than Mariota. He did. Back when he was first learning how to throw the football, still had a 30-30 season, and then a 14 touchdown to 3 interception half season, which would have projected to a 36 season. That's the kind of progress I like to see in a quarterback who, even with that 31 interception season, had less interceptions and just about as many touchdowns as Peyton Manning did 5 years into his NFL career. Keep those things in mind, Steeler Nation. Aaron Harris, am I wrong, or does it look like our receivers do not block or get separation that they need? I think that was a big reason why we got rid of Ike Hilliard as our wide receivers coach. We have big-bodied receivers, willing blockers in Claypool, in Juju Smith-Schuster, but the blocking was not there. Washington is an excellent blocking wide receiver as well. For as little as he gives us on the field as a receiving receiver, he is an excellent blocking receiver. Excellent, willing blocking receiver. But they weren't utilized correctly, and they weren't coached up, I guess, to the point where it was acceptable, and that was probably a big reason why we have a new wide receivers coach now. Justin Johnson is the only one who gets open. True. When you're that good at route running, I mean, he's AB Jr. He is as good of an X receiver at getting open as any receiver we've had. Looking a lot like Antonio Brown, higher floor than Antonio Brown was coming into the league. And as long as he takes care of his drops, his ceiling could be as high. And that's something I want to see moving forward. Michael Scott Joyner, how you doing, Michael Scott? Good to hear from you. Watson. Wouldn't hate getting Watson. Definitely not. Marcus Mota does not throw too many interceptions compared to the Super champion Jameis Winston. That was the 31 interception season. We discussed that, but he improved over time. Mariota never did. Deshawn Watson. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Deshawn Watson. Yes, that's another guy I consider bringing in, and they wanted 3 first-round draft picks for him. Now they'd be lucky to get 1 with all of his problems sitting out a year because of his offseason problems. We don't even know if he's going to play this year. But if he can remove his offseason problems, that doesn't make him any better. Essentially, he just becomes a different Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger had his offseason problems as well that some people around the league and fans in general never fully got over for Ben Roethlisberger. He became a family man, really good community member, very religious, just an excellent teammate, an excellent person from 2010 on. Really had been. Brad Robb, head coach Munch, GM Omar Khan, GM Omar Khan, President Tomlin, then bring Hines in for the wide receiver coach. Sold. Let's do that. All for it. Hines Ward would be a good linebackers coach. Well said, Brian Brown. Love that comment. Mark Kane. Hello, Mark. They say next year quarterback crop is a better choice, and that is true. That is why this is a kind of a rebuilding year. Let's throw out and see, build up the offensive line, build up the defensive line, get those parts that we need for defense, inside linebacker, strong safety, corner. We might go corner with the first pick in the draft, depending on who's there at 20. Hopefully somebody good. Fingers crossed. I asked Louis Riddick specifically on the podcast, is there any front office or coaching job that would make you want to leave broadcasting? And he specifically said there were 3 teams specifically that he would look to play for or coach for in the NFL, that he would leave his nice cush job in Monday Night Football, which he says is the pinnacle. It's up there for the tops for the pinnacle of announcing. Loves the freedom of being able to announce, spending time with a family, but he said he would play for 3 legacy franchises, which all happen to be family-owned teams. He did state the Raiders, he did state the Giants, and he did state the Steelers. He said if any of those teams called and asked for an interview, he would say when. Because he would be definitely interested. And then I pressed him further and I said, would you be more interested in being a GM or a coach? And he obviously said he's a GM strictly. He's a front office guy. He actually, at one point in his career, early in his career, when he was with Washington as a scout, he was talking with Marvin Lewis his year that he was in Washington before he became the head coach of Cincinnati Bengals. And he's like, Marvin, I'm thinking about getting into coaching. And instantly, Marvin Lewis is like, no, bro, no. You're a front office guy. You never want to be a coach when you're already established as a front office guy. Front office guys get a little bit more of a home life than a coach. A coach is always living, breathing, thinking football. A GM guy is more of a chess player. What are the pieces that we need to make this team better? Not as much hands-on being a GM as you are being a head coach. A lot of time to work, like especially when you're evaluating talent during the combine, during the Senior Bowl, during the pro days at different colleges. Those are all important times in the draft, of course. Free agency, of course. So it looks like February through May is your time. Your time to bring in talent, to make this football team better. And then, of course, trying to retool and do moves here and there if things pop up, if you have more holes that you need to fill that didn't get filled appropriately with free agency, with the draft. You've got to fill those holes again moving forward, possibly making trades. That was something that Kevin Colbert was really good at. But Louis said, no, don't be a coach. Stay in the front office. Though he does see himself, he said he projected and said he probably would make a good head coach. He can see the big picture for the game. He can understand the X's and O's, obviously, but it is a lot of extra work. It's probably the hardest job in the NFL is to be the NFL head coach. And I didn't even realize how hard of a job it was until I read Bill Cowher's book, Heart of Steel. Highly recommend you guys, Steeler fans. Anybody, even if you're a young fan and you didn't grow up in the Bill Cowher era, it gives you great insight and even showed Cowher some humility on how difficult it is to be a head coach and trying to like fathom being a head coach and a GM at the same time. He acquiesced. He understood that's too much work. He even had too hard of a time the one game where he tried to call the offensive plays while being the head coach and failed miserably at doing it and wrote it beautifully. It was a great chapter in that book. But toughest thing to do in the NFL is obviously to be an NFL head coach. So we'll have to see. And I'm trying to pick up here where I stopped. I know Brian Brown, I was ready for your next question. Here it is, Brian. Wouldn't the Steelers be better off to fill the other holes than worry about drafting a quarterback next year with better draft next year? Yes. You, me, and Mark all agree. Yes. Well, unless Pickett drops. I mean, if Pickett drops, you kind of have to take the shot at him because he is that best quarterback. But they're stating that the quarterbacks will all be better than the quarterbacks that are in this draft. And that's usually the case. Like there's years where you got a couple of drafts, might have one good quarterback, might not have any good quarterbacks, but then the following year you might have 3 good quarterbacks. So this might be one of those years where it might be a lean year. I think Mason should get a chance. That's great, Brian Brown, and I love that perspective as well. There's a lot of people in Steeler Nation that do agree with you. I love his deep ball. I love his arm strength. He showed it in Oklahoma. He loved throwing that deep ball to Washington and works well with Washington. I don't think Washington's going to be on this team this year as he's a free agent, and we're probably not looking to retain him, especially with his Z receiver slot locked up by Chase Claypool. Not looking to come back here at all. Even if there was an option of coming back, I think he wants to be the guy for another team, get out there and run routes and play. So, but yes, Mason's shown he can throw a football in this league. So I'm interested to see more out of him. And he's a winning quarterback in this league. Rad Rob, Dan Rooney was high school quarterback in competition with Johnny Unitas, correct? He had Unitas cut in training camp. Hall of Fame quarterback Len Dawson, Steelers on the bench, correct. Chief Art's dying words, Dan, were, I told you to draft Marino. They weren't dying. He said it while he was alive. But yes, I get what you're saying. And also, I think Dan Rooney was the reason why they brought Johnny Unitas to the Steelers in the first place, to bring him into practice squad or to training camp, because he knew Dan Rooney, and he had that relationship in college. So really interesting points. And I love the perspectives as well. So great points, Rad Rob. Love that. Mark Kane, I'm interested in how we draft players this year and the next few years. Must improve a lot now. Pass happy league now. And that's the thing too. Like that's the toughest thing. And that's the thing too. I guess the people that who either like Mason Rudolph or like Dwayne Haskins. We've seen what the quarterbacks are doing here in the playoffs. We saw that game against Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes, which was one of the single greatest playoff games I've ever seen in my life. Period. Awesome game. And you see the quarterbacks that made the AFC Championship game. 2 big ones, Matt Stafford, Tom Brady, and of course, the guy, Joe Exotic over there with his Bengal Tigers making the Super Bowl, who I'm going to be rooting for this upcoming week. But it's going to be, but you have to have a quarterback that can compete with those type of guys, unless your defense is locking them down. If your defense is limiting plays and getting turnovers, doesn't matter. Then that you have that athletic quarterback that can put up points like these guys. But if you're on a same number of turnovers as the other team, you've got to have a quarterback that can put up points. Can Mason Rudolph match those point outputs as a Mahomes, as a Burrow? I don't think so. Can Haskins? I don't know. Personally, I'm not sure. These are big question marks. We have to see how they do in the new Matt Canada system with those quarterbacks that are in there to run it. Aaron Harris again, too. I imagine our run game and blocking was subpar, and lack of a mobile quarterback is why they covered our receivers so well. Yeah, and his inability to throw down the deep middle of the field. Ben could not hit the deep middle of the field to save his life this past season. Everything was at or near 8 yards or in, or down the sideline. That was the only place he threw the football pretty much his entire year. So yes, a different quarterback, any quarterback, even Mason Rudolph, would be an improvement for his passing tree and the route tree by these receivers coming in for this next season, because Ben just didn't have it. He just didn't have it anymore. Rad Rob, the Steelers have all been horrible with their quarterbacks. Terry and Ben are the exception and not the rule. Steelers are back to being the soft, cheesy 1980s Steelers with decades until another Terry Ben. Though we did have a Pro Bowl quarterback that made a Super Bowl with Neil O'Donnell, and another Pro Bowl quarterback that made the AFC Championship game, I think, more than once with Cordell Stewart. So still, even though we were lean, we like to forget, like, the quarterbacks that don't win Super Bowls, Steelers usually discount. I know we had our years of Mark Malone and Tom Zach and Miller and, oh gosh, another guy too that I forget that was right around Tom Zach as well. But we had a rotation of quarterbacks in it, and it's not fun. Steeler Nation, it is not fun to go through a point where you're trying to find your next franchise guy. And we're in it now. Rad Rob's 100% right. We're back in it. So we'll see how we do this year. We'll see how we start trying to find the next great Pittsburgh Steeler quarterback. Brian Brown, I heard Terrell Austin was fired by the Bengals after his defense gave up 50-plus points in 3 straight games. Don't know if that's true. I've heard a lot of that as well. And it was in 3 straight games. One was to the Pat Mahomes Young-led team with Pat Mahomes, and of course they're going to put up 50 points. One was Tampa Bay, but I don't think Brady was not on that Tampa Bay team. Winston was on that team, and he did have some good offensive output in a few games and early on in his career there for Tampa Bay. So I could see that, and I forget the third team, but I thought it was another high offensive output team. So I was like, these 3 teams aren't 3 teams that, if it was like he gave up 50-plus points to the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New York Jets, and who's another crappy team, Detroit Lions this season, then yeah, that would be a big deal to me. It happens in the NFL. You have a bad run sometimes. Look at the Steelers' statistical deviation of horrible points let up in defensive playoff games these last 3 times in the playoffs. Yeah, it leads to some interesting statistics, but they're skewed statistics because they are playoff statistics taking across different years, different teams. So it becomes an interesting narrative, not necessarily what your team is projected to do with those types of statistics. Jermaine LeBlanc, back again. Thank you, my friend. Good to hear from you again. How do I feel about Jimmy G being the Steelers' next starting quarterback? And that's another guy. See, Jimmy G would be a guy I'd like more than Marcus Mariota. I honestly would, because he's an established guy in the league. He's a winner, generally good touchdown to interception ratio, knows how to lead a team, knows how to get deep in the playoffs. Obviously doesn't always get to the Super Bowl, hasn't made it to the Super Bowl yet, unfortunately. But, to me, he'd be a great transitional option, a guy to help be that bridge while you're rebuilding the offensive line and the defense to get to the point of being hitting the high bar with that new franchise quarterback. Bunny Brister! I don't know if that's a joke for Bubby Brister, but I think it's super cute that he called him Bunny Brister. And now I think we should only refer to him as Bunny Brister when we get close to Easter time, because I really love that. And I'm going to bring that back here, Michael Scott Joyner. Love it. Absolutely love it. Rad Rob, heard Terrell Austin is a yes man who does his best Mike Tomlin impersonation, so he'll get hired by the new Steelers. So the one thing about, and I will agree with you to an extent here, Rad Rob, I didn't really want an internal hire. I didn't. Even though he was hired externally 2 years ago, he's been doing really well. Just so you know, for the past 2 years, he's the reason why our turnover ratio on defense has improved so much. His emphasis has always been on stripping the football while you're trying to tackle the player. And that is what Baltimore Ravens always do. And that really created an impact for our defense to be a lot better than it could have been, especially with all the injuries that we had. The games where we got turnovers, we destroyed teams. We absolutely destroyed teams that were better than us. That Tennessee game, case in point, being +4 and that turnover ratio was the reason why we won that game, and still ended up being a squeaker for us. That's how many turnovers we needed in that game to be competitive. But I wanted an outside hire per se because I am still kind of on the situation where does our defensive coordinator even change with an internal hire since Mike Tomlin is calling the plays? I hope that Austin gets to call the plays. I really do. Because, I mean, Tomlin's doing a fine job. We've led the league in sacks the last 5 seasons. No team has ever done that in NFL history. So that's one good aspect with our pressure, but we've got to get better on the back end and stopping teams on 3rd down and in red zone, because that's the money down and that's the money position on the field. You win those locations, you win every football game. Brian Brown, how many games will Mason Rudolph have to win to get Steelers Nation behind him? I mean, behind him 100%. I know. Didn't he win like 6 or 5? I think he won 5 his year that he was went 5-3. I think the year that Ben was hurt. Duck had a winning record as well that season. Ben was the only quarterback with a losing record on that roster, being 0-2. Yeah, a lot of people don't give him the credit that he deserves as well. I remember he beat Cleveland in the one playoff game, or was that Landry Jones beating Cleveland in the one playoff? That might have been Landry Jones. But I remember him winning up one of the late season games and then losing against Cleveland, but ended up being the more competitive game that we played against the Cleveland Browns in 2019, the last game of the season, than it was in the playoffs with Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback and resting 5 of our best players in that specific game. Nearly won that game. So, I don't hate him. I don't. And I think he's a good game manager. I think he can get the team in position to win. We need a strong defense and even stronger Najee Harris to make sure to win football games if Mason Rudolph is our quarterback. Aaron Harris, what are some possible trade signings that could be made and make sense? I don't know too much about trades, to tell you the truth, Aaron, because when the Steelers are in a position for rebuilding as we are now, trades usually involve giving up draft picks. Like a player-for-player trade, I don't know if we'd want to get into that unless possibly move Devin Bush, possibly move Joe Schobert, because he's going to be a big cap hit this year. He might be a cap casualty. Because it's like $9 million in savings if we get rid of him, $8 to $9 million. So it'll be really interesting to see what we do at inside linebacker. But there's very few player-for-player trades that I could see with talented players that may not be fitting our system 100%. And that's not something that the Steelers normally look to do. But free agency, my number one guy in free agency is Tyrann Mathieu. I want him. I want him on the team. We got rid of our playmaker in Mike Hilton the previous offseason, which was my number one pick to bring him back as a free agent because he's a cheap one at $6 million a year, right, for 4 years. You bring him back. Guy makes turnovers, gets sacks, knocks down passes, TFLs. That's a guy you keep on the roster. And damn, did we need a guy to make tackles in the middle of that defense this year. He would have been a difference maker in some of our games. He really would have been. Hitting people in the hole, knocking them over instead of getting knocked back in the hole, as some of our strong safeties and slot corners ended up being this season. I said slot receiver, I meant slot corner, obviously. Brian Brown, I miss Blitzburg. Bring back the blitz. We did our fair share of blitz, and in 5 straight years of leading the league in sacks, we're doing a pretty damn good job. Just blitzes, you can open yourself up when you're rushing too many people. That's why the zone blitz is better, because we're still rushing 4. The other team just doesn't know which 4 we're rushing. That's what I like to see out of a blitz. But we've been throwing some 5s every once in a while, rarely a 6, because you're going to have wide open people down the field. You got to get your hits there early. So Brian Brown, Mason Rudolph is like Baker Mayfield without the attitude. Maybe. Might be an even. Maybe we can trade Mason Rudolph for Baker Mayfield. It'd be pretty much the same guy. I think I'd rather have Mason Rudolph than Baker Mayfield, to tell you the truth. I think Baker Mayfield or Mason Rudolph has a stronger arm than Baker Mayfield, to tell you the exact truth. But that's a funny stuff. Hashtag Honey Badger. Yeah, I love people with me on that. I want Honey Badger standing next to Minka Fitzpatrick on this defense. I do. I think that this defense would be a top 3 defense. Just putting those two guys together, take a lot of pressure off of your outside corners, and really turn this secondary into being a strength. Like, that's a one-guy change. Make it happen, Louis Riddick. Rad Rob, why isn't James Harrison a new conditioning trainer? Oh, would love that. Why Hines and not some home as Steelers wide receiver coach? I was 100% with that too. Why didn't he get interviewed? I said that earlier in the show. I wanted Hines when we hired Ike Hilliard. I was mentioning that when he ended up being hired by the Jets, I think that same season. Why not Gay at defensive back assistant? Well, now we have an opening at defensive back assistant. Maybe we do bring in Gay or a guy like Townsend. Townsend was a really heady player too. I wouldn't mind him, or Lake. I'd love to have Lake as a defensive backs coach. Why Charlie not assistant quarterback? I'd love him to be a quarterback coach, but he loves announcing too much. That's something that he's mentioned specifically. Why not Faneca and Munch? Tomlin's ego. These I don't think are ego things, because he's brought in Munch before. Munch was already a head coach before. If he had an ego, he wouldn't bring a head coach into his team. There was at one point he had 4 head coaches coaching underneath of him. He had Munch, he had Haley, he had Dick LeBeau, all of them being head coaches previously. Not once did you ever hear a single word out of any of them saying that their younger head coach did not know what he was doing or made the wrong decision. Not once. If he was such a bad leader, you think one of them would have piped up with something, or something would have slipped out going to another team or leaving the organization. Never did. Interesting perspective. Brian Brown, I'd rather have Mason. That's fine. You can have Mason. This is the fun thing. This is an argument that never ends. Rad Rob, why not Troy coming out? Troy's got such a thing. Why not Hampton and Steed brought back to the D line? Why not bring back Green to come back and do the offensive line? But unfortunately, he was a scout for a long time. Mean Joe. They'd be more beloved than Tomlin, but his ego won't have it. Yeah, I don't think that's ever a situation. You don't have to worry about Tomlin's ego at all. Tomlin is essentially an egoless head coach. You want to see a head coach with an ego? Why don't you start listening to some press conferences with Harbaugh? That guy's got an ego. That guy's got a huge ego. And one so big that it's never his fault that his team loses. He will fire offensive and defensive coordinators that week if they screw up. He will blame the refs more than anybody else. He let Munch go and really trying to talk to him into staying. Well, Munch left because of his family. Now we'll see if that is the biggest reason, because it would seem like Steelers would be a good situation for Munch to return to a stable organization. When he left for his family out in Denver, unfortunately, they had turnover and it didn't work out. Brian Brown, I'm not sure all these former Steeler players want to be a coach. That is true as well. A lot of them get on with their life's work. Like we all know, Emperor Chaz used to say, Rad Rob. Steelers' lameness began when Mean Joe left Colbert as his advisor about 7 years ago. Mean Joe left Colbert as his advisor. I don't understand that statement. Lameness began when Mean Joe left Colbert as his advisor about 7 years ago. I rewrite that. That just doesn't. I don't understand that statement. What is the word with Tyson and Tuitt? Well, Tuitt is the craziest aspect. And I thought usually you hear about it is the weirdest year ever for a player being injured and on injured reserve, because you usually hear something. It's like, he'll be back next year. He's hurt. He had to get ankle surgery. He had to get knee surgery. He's not going to rehab until he's not going to be back till next year. They should have done that at the beginning of the season and gotten rid of it. It was quiet all year. Nobody wanted to talk about Tuitt all year. And we got to the end of the season. Not once has any of the coaches or Colbert stated that we expect Tuitt to be back next year. That concerns me severely. That really concerns me severely, because he decided not to play football this season. I don't know if that's a guy I want to commit to moving forward. And that's something that our new GM is going to have to take responsibility for deciding. Now, the good news on Tyson, I stated in a podcast earlier where I thought Tyson was out forever. Tyson Alualu as the nose. And the reason why I thought is he's in his other side of 30s. He got a severe injury, missed the entire season. So those kind of guys usually end up kind of rethinking their place in football and being like, yeah, I might be done playing football. Tyson, though, came back out in social media stating he is ready to play next year. He wants to play with TJ. He wants to play with Hayward, next to Hayward again. He felt like he left the team down by getting injured last season. So he's coming back with a refound sense of purpose and wants to fight hard for the Steelers this next year. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Garrett Johnson, as a Michigan State fan and a Steelers fan, both of the Harbaughs have the biggest ego. Correct. Because I mean, that's like their family cheer. Who has it better than us? Nobody. That's a family cheer for the Harbaughs. They think they are above everyone else. You can have them. You can have either Harbaugh, in my opinion. A lot of the college ranks, you get really high ego, like much more high-egoed coaches in the college ranks because essentially they're gods in college. They are the GM, the scout, the guy that brings in the talent. They do everything in college. They never have a day off. But those guys have to have a big ego and be larger than life to bring in that kind of talent for their programs. Doesn't happen as much in the NFL, but Harbaugh is one of them. Harbaugh really is one of them. Brian Brown, let's keep the faith, everybody. Just because Ben is not the quarterback doesn't mean the Steelers can't win the Super Bowl. Just need some gaps filled. Agreed. And that's the way Steeler Nation is. Next season, what can we do to win the Super Bowl? Not what can we do to get better? Because our franchise is on a different level. Okay, thank you, Rad Rob, for coming back and letting me know exactly. Mean Joe left. He commented, defensive players like Mike Mitchell celebrating tackles after a gain of yards was un-Steeler-like. Yes, I do remember that. And Joe said they don't look like Steelers. Probably said that about Anthony Smith as well back when he was our strong safety. Kevin Loft, the best defensive advisor in Green, though Green was a scout. He wasn't a defensive advisor. I don't think he was ever part of the coaching staff on the team. But great perspectives, and I do remember, love talking about those things that we do remember. And Steeler Nation, your last chance to get your comments and your questions in. We have reached the end of the Steeler Nation vidcast. I'm going to start running down. Go to tscshop.com. Heck, check them out right now on Twitter. I'm sure they're giving away a jersey right now over at Total Sports Enterprises. That's TSE on Twitter. Vidcast, obviously, every Tuesday at 7 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Steeler Nation, or go check out the actual podcast each week at DK Pittsburgh Sports. Usually drops both on video and the podcast at 6 p.m. over at DK Pittsburgh Sports on Fridays. Check out great Pittsburgh Steeler content at SteelerNation.com. Our awesome football forum there as well, guys. Free to sign up. And right now I have a thread open to ask questions for the podcast for Friday. So jump over there, make an account, ask questions, and I will read them, all of them, on the podcast on Friday. SteelerNation.com. Tweet us at Steeler Nation. Instagram us at Steeler Nation. Follow the podcast at _SN Podcast on Twitter and at Steeler Nation Podcast on Instagram. Or you can follow me, Steeler Nation Striker on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for joining us. Hang on, checking out for the last sign-offs. Who's got the last thing to say? Brian Brown's got the last thing to say. Will the Steelers re-sign Terrell Edmunds? If it's my decision, no. If Louis Riddick becomes the GM, I don't think he will re-sign him either. I don't. Garrett Johnson, if Pittsburgh could keep both the internal GM candidates and get Riddick, it would be huge. Yeah, it would. That would be really interesting. Maybe develop somebody for a player personnel position. Hopefully Hunt can find a position here too with us, maybe get promoted. Rad Rob again too, because Coach T's lack of discipline with his players, the Steelers became something different than what Mean Joe knows as Steelers. You can say that, but it might become also with society. Society has changed people, and so has social media. So I'm not going to blame it on him because I see it around the entire league, not just on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I see it the least amount, usually on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Good show, Striker. Go Steelers! And that's all the time we have here, guys, on the Steeler Nation vidcast, my favorite cast of the week because I get to talk with you guys. Thanks for joining us on the Steeler Nation vidcast, sponsored by Total Sports Enterprises, part of the Big Play Network. I'm your host, G.Stryker, rooting along with you as always, along with Brian Brown and Aaron Harris and Rad Rob and Garrett Johnson, rooting along with you all as always. Go Steelers!